The Trumpet Daily with Stephen Flurry.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Trumpet Daily radio show. Can't believe it's already Friday, but we've got an extra program that we're going to squeeze into the schedule like we've done the last 2 weekends. The special Saturday edition of the Trumpet Daily radio show. That's tomorrow, 3 p.m. here in the UK, 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and 9 a.m. in central Oklahoma, or all across the Central Standard Time, in fact. 10 a.m. on the East Coast of the United States, and of course at different times all over the world. Wherever it is that you're listening, if you listened in the last couple of Saturdays, then you should know about when the time will be for you. Just wanted to give you one follow-up headline to what we discussed the last two programs. This one from MSN that says, European leaders warn coronavirus could lead to the breakup of their union. So this is serious for the EU. And of course, we've been talking about this for a number of years. We told you about Brexit. We said Britain would no longer be in the union, or at some point they'd break away from it. And that has happened. Mr. Armstrong was saying it back before they even joined the economic community. He said it when they joined up with the union in 1973. He said it all the way through to the end of his ministry. And we've been saying it for these past 3 decades. Brexit happened. We've also said that the union, as you see it today, it's going to be downsized to the 10 kings, those 10 groups. And as I've stressed the last 2 programs, you're seeing these strongmen appear all over the place now, taking advantage of this crisis. They're not letting the crisis go to waste. Well, speaking of the crisis, for most of today's show, we're going to talk about root causes. There really are some valuable lessons that we can take away from this health crisis that our nations are battling against. And I think you'll see where these lessons, if we really get them deeply, it can help us to better prepare for the spring holy days and for the Passover in particular. I know I have quite a few listeners who listen to this program or the podcast of it while they're exercising. And for those who do that, they'll probably really enjoy today's show. They might love some of the information that we cover here in the next hour or so. For some of us who maybe don't exercise quite as much, and then on top of that, if we struggle with maintaining a proper diet, some of the content on today's show may be somewhat corrective, but just know as you listen along with me that it's corrective for all of us, and these are laws. Really, it's corrective, but it's inspiring too, because these are laws revealed by our Creator, and God gives us these health laws, these physical health laws, so that we can experience the abundant life. That's what Jesus came to give us, John 10 and verse 10. He wants us to live a life of abundance, and that's what makes this subject so inspiring, and it's what makes this program so unique. What we'll cover here today, you just don't hear it anywhere else, on any other show. You only get it from God's church, from the Trumpet website, from our literature. I'll begin with a story coming out of Sweden, or at least it's in the Telegraph actually, but it's about Sweden. In Sweden at present, there's no lockdown. Their shopping centers are all open. Schools are open. Several people, or quite a few people, I should say, are working from home, but it's optional. They have a choice, quite unlike what we see in so many other nations. And as of this morning, there have been 308 deaths in Sweden related to coronavirus. So still some have died, not nearly as many as in other nations. And they haven't shut down their entire economy. So Sweden's doing it differently. They have rejected the imperial model the Imperial College of London model, and we've talked about that in recent weeks. They have a lead epidemiologist who has also held daily press conferences, not unlike some of the medical experts that we've seen in front of the cameras here in the UK, in the United States. But this epidemiologist in Sweden, he does not agree with the imperial model at all. According to the Telegraph, it says here, crucially, he isn't asking Swedes to trust him. His name is Anders Tegnell. He's not asking Swedes to trust him. Hospital data is published all the time, so they're being very open and transparent about the problem, the extent of it, where it is, how it's spreading, and so on. And, of course, they're encouraging all of the same common sense guidelines of quarantining yourself if you do come down with the virus or the disease, washing your hands and so on, being careful with handshakes, that kind of thing. But it says here, hospital data is published all the time, so Sweden's experiment is being conducted in the open. Every time a patient is admitted, the data is updated on a COVID Live website in striking detail. Sweden's famous love of transparency is being used as a tool to foster trust. Now, this might present some issues for people in the United States and the UK as well, just the lack of privacy. In any event, this is their approach. As I say, it's very different than some other nations. But it says here, so far it's working. Polls show that 3/4 of Swedes support the strategy. So this epidemiologist that has not shut down the nation, he has widespread support, 75%. It says the debate overall is very different from Britain's. There's no shortage of epidemiologists in the Swedish press backing Tegnell and denouncing the desk-based theory of the Imperial College study. So they're looking at the UK saying, you've shut down everything based on a model. Just a model. And of course, the model's been way off already. And they keep revising it. They keep playing with the numbers. And they keep terrifying people. But here's what I want to focus on. This is from the article about Sweden. Again, they're very forthright with all the information. And it has to do with the coronavirus victims, those that die from it. It says the average age, 60. And then those with, and a lot of them are dying with underlying health causes. It says those with diabetes, 26%, with cardiovascular or lung disease, 24%. It says with at least one other underlying health condition, 77%. It says Sweden is also updating its statistics to say if someone died from COVID or of something else, but with COVID. So they're being very specific. They're pointing out, okay, these are the few cases where it's, as far as we know, it's just coronavirus. And here's the number of cases where, yes, they had the virus when they died, but they had some serious chronic health issues. It says this might reduce the death figure by 2/3. 2/3. Now, this squares with what Neil Ferguson said when he started to backtrack last week, where he said that overall, when we get to the end of this year and we count all of the deaths, really it may have a negligible effect on just the overall deaths for the UK, which is 600,000 every year. Because, as Neil Ferguson said, a lot of these victims were about to die anyway. That was discussed in the Telegraph last week. He said up to 2/3 of coronavirus victims were really sick to begin with. So we'll see again when it's all said and done, and we'll look at the end of the year statistics. Here in the UK, 600,000 deaths on average per year. In the United States, it's 3 million Americans die every single year. And if we take the low end now, again, it's been revised down, but if we take the low end of what Dr. Fauci is saying, 100,000 deaths, when you put that in with 3 million, or add it to 3 million, that's an additional 6.6%. So it's a significant percentage, to be sure. But like they're asking here in the UK and like they're pointing out in Sweden, how many of that 100,000, this is assuming we even get to that, how many were suffering with chronic disease to begin with? Let me start by just playing a clip. We played this, I believe, on Monday. This is the CNN medical expert, Sanjay Gupta, who said on March 27th, clip 1.
The vast majority of people, even if you're elderly, aren't going to need hospitalization. The vast majority are going to recover. The vast majority are not going to die.
So I think he said that actually a week ago. In any event, we're getting more and more statistics now coming in. And as we do, we're learning more about the deaths, and the mortality rate continues to go down. And as he said there, the vast majority of people, even if you're elderly, you're not even going to need hospitalization. I think the percentage is that it's like 80%. It's over 99% overall that survive this virus. But even among the elderly, you have an 80% survival rate. That's according to Sanjay Gupta and some of the statistics that we're seeing. Now, again, this is something that the New York mayor, Bill de Blasio, I think I played this clip recently as well, but he pointed this out on March 10th. This is before we entered into lockdown mania. This is before the wartime dynamic. He was talking about that just a few days after this clip you'll hear. But listen to what he says on March 10th, clip 2.
We've got to look out for people here, especially those who are over 50 years old and have pre-existing conditions like lung disease, heart disease, cancer, diabetes. These are the folks we really, really need to be careful for. But if you're under 50 and you're healthy, which is most New Yorkers, there's very little threat here. This disease, even if you were to get it, basically acts like a common cold or flu.
So that was him on March 10th. Saying that if you're vulnerable, if you have a pre-existing condition, well, a few days later, everything started shutting down, and that's been the trend all over the world, except in a few places, like Sweden, some of the nations in Southeast Asia. They haven't done this, a total shutdown. Brazil, obviously. So there are a few that have taken a different course. And there really, I've talked about some of the statistics coming in. There really aren't enough statistics now to even show or to prove that the shutdown is reducing the number. Now, I know the experts will take credit. If it's not as bad in the end as they said it would be, they'll say it was the shutdown. But we really don't have evidence of that. But I'll stick to the main point that I want to focus in on here. You heard it from de Blasio, you heard it from Gupta, that most people that get this will not die from it. They will recover. Now, earlier this week, you may have seen headlines with respect to the CNN commentator, Chris Cuomo, who came down with the virus. And so he's confined himself to his basement, wherever he lives, and he's still doing his program. His CNN program each night from his basement. But this is what his brother's the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, and this is what his brother Andrew said when the family discovered or found out that Chris had tested positive for the disease. Clip 3.
My brother Chris is positive for coronavirus, found out this morning. He is going to be fine. He's young, in good shape, strong, not as strong as he thinks, but he will be fine.
So there's Andrew Cuomo, even with a little joke there on the side, not seeming that concerned about it. And when Chris Cuomo talked about it on his show, he was kind of joking back and forth with Don Lemon, his colleague. Don Lemon joked, "Hey, did you get my my gift? A 6-pack of Corona?" He said. That was on CNN. And then they've had their moments where, again, it's supposed to be very, very serious, and it is serious. It is serious. He talked, in fact, Chris talked about the sleepless night that he had with hallucinations and such, but it hasn't prevented him from going on TV each night. In any event, there's Andrew Cuomo saying he's tested positive, but he's going to be fine because he's young and he's healthy. He's in good shape. And you do have to give Chris Cuomo some credit for that. He looks like he's in remarkable shape physically. Some of these athletes that you've heard that have tested positive, people haven't just reacted in shock to think that, oh no, they're going to die, because they know the chances of that happening are very, very, very slim. So who is dying then? Well, the vast majority of people dying from this disease are already sick or very unhealthy. And you're beginning to see more and more commentators really lay stress to that point. Dr. Stephen Smith of New Jersey, he was on Laura Ingram's show on Fox a couple nights ago, and he's had coronavirus victims coming in and out of his clinic. And listen to what he said, clip 4.
The more we see this disease, the more we understand that severe rapid COVID disease, especially, is in diabetics or pre-diabetics. We have, I'm looking at 19 or 20 patients that are intubated, and 18 of the 20 were intubated, or diabetic rather, and 2 are pre-diabetic. We don't have anybody that's been intubated in our group of over 80 now that was not diabetic or pre-diabetic that was intubated. We had severe disease. We've seen younger patients with severe disease that have a very high BMI. We have patients that are 150 kilograms, so I'm doing the math quickly, that's over 300 pounds. We're seeing a lot of this. And I don't understand. And just now, I think the world's catching up to this. The Seattle group published on their data in the New England Journal of Medicine, saying that 58% of their ICU COVID patients were diabetic, and that their average BMI was 33, which is morbidly obese. So that fits with our data, but what people haven't focused on yet is that the pre-diabetics are also at risk, especially if they have a high BMI. We haven't had anyone under 70 who didn't have a very high BMI or was pre or diabetic get seriously ill.
That last statement there in particular, we haven't had anyone under 70 who didn't have a high BMI. In other words, they weren't morbidly obese, or they weren't struggling with diabetes or maybe heart disease, something like that, who got seriously ill. Everyone. Now, this is just one case study. He didn't obviously test or work with all 50-some thousand victims, but if he's got 80 or so people coming in and out of his clinic, it says a lot. The ones who are vulnerable to this are those who are obese, who are struggling with some kind of chronic condition, a pre-existing condition. That makes you more vulnerable. Now, I think if you step back and just look at the bigger picture, again, the trend today, at this moment, this is the way that we're supposed to fight this. It's by self-isolation, quarantine. So now, again, quarantine makes perfect sense if you're sick. But if you look at how many of these people who are sick that catch this virus and then die, a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's too much self-isolation. And by that, I mean not enough movement. And then, of course, poor diet to go along with it. So here is man stabbing in the dark. You've got some nations trying this, other nations trying this. And then this disease that just keeps spreading. And if you notice, it's spreading the fastest in Western nations, where we have the Western diet, the rich diet in carbs and sugars and that sort of thing. Why are some of the nations that maybe don't eat like Americans, they've just had a handful die from this disease? I got an email about that graphic you see on the YouTube stream right now. That was on Fox the other night as well. Again, just showing how many people with these underlying health problems that are dying, because of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, chronic lung disease, and such. But I got this, you've seen the pictures early on, of course, people making a run on the supermarkets, buying up toilet paper, cleaning supplies, that sort of thing. And I got an email about a week ago from one of our listeners who has worked at a grocery store for about 40 years. And he was stocking the store with, and as we've said, he said it's certainly the case. People came in, they emptied the shelves, toilet paper and such, cleaning supplies. And then as far as foodstuffs, milk, eggs, that sort of thing, those things went fast. But he said probably the number one food item to empty off the shelves first was ramen noodles. Ramen noodles, no nutritional value whatsoever. And yet that's what people are loading up on. That's the Western diet. The CDC came out a few days ago saying that the most commonly reported conditions, the underlying conditions, it's a coronavirus update, the most commonly reported underlying conditions were diabetes, chronic lung disease, and cardiovascular disease. It says these preliminary findings suggest that in the United States, persons with underlying health conditions or other recognized risk factors for severe outcomes from respiratory infections appear to be at a higher risk for severe disease from COVID-19 than are persons without these conditions. In other words, if you don't have these pre-existing conditions, you are much more likely to survive. For you, like Mayor de Blasio said, for you, it's much more likely to be. Not in every case. Of course, there's exceptions. But across the board, that's what I'm talking about here. For you, it's much more likely to be like a common cold or a mild flu in some cases, maybe a severe flu. But these are the stats that are beginning to come in. Our physical education director at headquarters in Edmond, Joel Hilliker, he sent me this video from the CrossFit founder, Greg Glassman. And it's a short little speech. I'll play a few excerpts here in a second. But in this speech, he's talking about he's basically separated the causes of death into 5 categories. You've got chronic cases, microbic, like disease and such, genetic, he says kinetic, or toxic. So he has these 5 categories, or he puts 5 buckets on the chalkboard. And of course, the biggest bucket of all, that's for the chronic diseases, because this is what's causing hundreds of thousands of deaths every year in the United States alone. So here he is talking about the healthcare system and then these 5 different causes. This is the CrossFit founder, Greg Glassman. Clip 5.
For a chronic disease, we've got stroke, coronary artery disease, diabetes, obesity, hypertension, and chronic kidney disease as examples. Important to note here, this is about 86% of our medical spend on our runaway medical expenditure, and it's 86% of spend, 80% of deaths. These are 14% of the spend or 20% of deaths. And I call this the willful divide because the significant thing here for us as CrossFitters is that we have solution to this side. And the solution here is what? It's get off the couch, off the carbs, because our claim is that sedentarism and excessive consumption of refined carbohydrate toxicity, some have half-jokingly said, are the overwhelming cause of what's going on in this bucket.
So that bucket, the big one, that's 80% of the deaths. The cause of 80, he's talking about cause and effect, which is something that we as God's people, we're very familiar with. Herbert Armstrong taught us in this. 80% of the deaths because of these chronic conditions, like diabetes, like heart disease, like cancer, and so on. So what are some of the solutions? Well, he teaches his CrossFit followers, and there's quite a few of them, to get off the couch and get off the carbs. In other words, get moving and eat right. As I say, this is not unusual for those of us in God's family. This is from Mr. Armstrong. Yes, it is easy to use reason to excuse disobedience to God. But God is not looking for chances to punish us, but rather for opportunities to save us through faith, to save us from the folly of sin and the sad consequence of our own act that our own acts impose. Whatever we sow, we shall reap. God's law is intended to protect us from suffering. It's not God who punishes us when we do wrong. It's merely our own acts rebounding like a boomerang. So we have to look at ourselves. As I say, this is really helpful, this study, to get us ready for Passover and the days of unleavened bread. We have to look at ourselves. And right now, all over the world, you see a lot of finger pointing. Well, it's his fault. Well, it's this program. It didn't work. Well, we don't have this. We don't have the ventilator. We don't have the face masks. We weren't alerted to this problem earlier enough. And God says, how about if we look at ourselves? How about if we look at what we're doing to ourselves? Here's the founder of CrossFit. He forgot to wear his suit for the speech, by the way. But still, it's good information. And he's basically saying this is not, some want to call it a lifestyle that leads to these chronic conditions. He says they're decisions. They're willful decisions. It's damaging behavior that we are responsible for. It's because of our own choices. Now, one of his categories, one of the 5, it talks about genetic influences as well. And Mr. Armstrong makes this point in his healing booklet that sometimes it's not always as a result or a direct result of our own sins. It can be the sins of our forebears. But on the whole, you look at how degenerate we are physically, even compared to a generation or two ago, and it's shocking. It's shocking. Here's what it says in the 7 Laws of Success. Most degenerative diseases are modern diseases. This is Mr. Armstrong. Penalties for eating foods that have been demineralized in food factories, usually an excess of starch, sugar, the carbohydrates, and fats. Now, Mr. Armstrong last revised that booklet in the early 1980s, I suppose. Here he is, way ahead of his time. Cause and effect. He says here, others are caused by a type of malnutrition, lack of needed minerals and vitamins in foods. Then people try to put the vitamins back into their systems by buying pills at the drugstore. So we try to fix it. We try to put a Band-Aid on it. Right now, the rush is to get the vaccine. We've got to get the vaccine so that we can go on living the same way we've been living. What are the leading causes of death in the United States every year? Number 1, heart disease. Over 600,000 people a year in the U.S. alone die of heart disease, and cancer is a close second. That's nearly 600,000 per year as well. Lower down on the list, you have chronic lower respiratory diseases, 154,000. Again, consider these numbers in relation to the numbers that you're supposed to be watching every second of every day. It's up to 6,000. It's up to 6,500. This is what goes on in the United States every year, every day, every week, every month. Diabetes, 80,000. Stroke, 142,000. Influenza, 51,000. On average, 51,000. Kidney disease, 50,000. And then suicide, 45,000. Mr. Armstrong continued in 7 Laws of Success. He said, a famous director of the physical fitness program lecturing at AC reminded us that the medical profession has made great strides toward eliminating communicable diseases, yet it is having little success coping with the increase of the non-communicable diseases such as cancer, heart disease, diabetes, kidney diseases. He says these latter are affected by faulty diet. That's from the 7 Laws of Success. So we've had all this success stamping out some of the communicable diseases, and in some ways you can see why man's reaction has been the way it has been the last couple months. Because here is a disease that's spreading around the world, and we don't know what to do. We don't have a vaccine for it. Listen again to this founder of CrossFit, clip 6.
The solution here is behaviorally driven, and it'll be behaviorally cured, or it'll be medically babysat.
Short little quip there. He's referring again to the big bucket, all the chronic diseases, saying that the way you cure it is by your behavior, cause and effect. And if you don't go that route, then you have Western medicine to babysit you. It's pretty blunt language, but here again, cause, and effect. Mr. Armstrong wrote in 1971, the very first trouble with our deteriorating physical status is that we take sickness for granted. We seem to assume sickness is natural and necessary. A cold or fever is merely a sudden, violent elimination of toxins and poisons you have injected into your body by wrong diet, which has broken God's physical laws. We always want to look at it as something, well, I caught it. I caught it from someone else. And now you have the world reacting hysterically because we don't want to go catch anything. We can't touch this handrail. We can't touch our faces. We certainly can't shake hands. We might catch something. But what about root causes? As he says there, a cold or a fever is merely a sudden, violent elimination of toxins and poisons that you've put into your body. That's the way we want to look at it. If we want to think like God, if we want to think about this subject the right way, this is the way we need to look at it. Mr. Armstrong also wrote, the Almighty God made the human body so that even though composed of material substance from the ground, its normal condition is one of robust, invigorating, radiant health. That's the normal condition. Now, there's a lot of degeneration all around us, including even in the food that grows naturally because of pesticides and all sorts of other tampering. Man likes to get in there and, genetically engineer things. And that takes away all the nutrition, the health building value that God put there to begin with. Because we have a better way. We've got machines that can do it. We've got machines that can mass produce things. We've got machines that can strip away what's healthy, but we'll say it's refined, and then you can think it's actually healthier for you. This founder of CrossFit, again, he's talking about some of these underlying health conditions that so many people struggle with, and then he ties it in. Listen here to see how he ties it in with the current health crisis with respect to coronavirus, clip 7.
What has happened is that the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is the virus responsible for COVID-19, the illness, has escaped the microbic bucket and landed in the chronic disease bucket and essentially started a trash can fire with a precipitation of death, to mix metaphors.
It started a trash can fire in the big bucket. Because of this infectious disease, it's spread into the big bucket, and this is why you have as many casualties as you do, because we have a lot of people in the Western world especially who are unhealthy and sick and diseased. Now, I'm not saying any of this to make those of you who might be healthier look down your nose at others. Not at all. I don't mean this to be that way at all. I just mean it to be the way God wants for it to be, that we all need to look at ourselves, that we all need to make more changes that can improve our own health and be a good example for others in the church, in the family, for our children. This is what God wants. He wants for us to look at cause and effect. And when there's a problem, whenever there's a problem, we want to go to the root cause. What are the root causes of this worldwide lockdown that we've seen? They don't want to talk about it on the news. They just want to gloss over it. You're getting bits and pieces here and there, and I'm trying to pull it together for you. But if you get to root causes for the lockdown, it's because of so many of us being in poor health. If we were in strong, robust health, this particular virus, as you've heard from others already, it's not that dangerous. So how much of this disease? Now we know there's disease epidemics that are prophesied to come. We know there's going to be a lot worse. There's going to be a lot that come and go right after healthier people, in fact. Revelation 6, Jesus talked about it. But even there, so much of that disease, it comes as a result of other factors, war and devastation, bombs exploding. And when you have anarchy, people roaming the streets, disregarding laws of hygiene, pollution sets in, and all of that factors in to how fast those diseases spread. Some of the improvements that were made following the Black Death in the 14th century, it's because of entire societies finally waking up to the fact that, if there's a lot of sickness here, we need to quarantine those who are sick. So they did that, and it finally did stamp out the spread of that curse, that disease. And a lot of it spread because it was just society at that time. There was just filth everywhere. So that's changed a lot of it, but yet we're going back in that direction. Look at our cities. Look at the filth and squalor. Is it any wonder that so much of this disease spreads more quickly? Where people are cramped up into tight quarters? 10 million people crammed into this tight little space in New York. Same with Detroit. Same with northern Italy. The population density in these areas, not that that's the only factor, but it certainly factors into it, for sure. Violating God's laws. What are the root causes? Look at how much we've brought on ourselves. Here, the entire economy in the Western world shut down. Here again is the CrossFit founder, Greg Glassman, clip 8.
We want to ask ourselves, does it make sense to call all of this the deaths that are happening over here, and this is the overwhelming majority of them, 95% of the deaths in New York, 99% in Italy. And so it's fair to say that the death is happening over here to people that are already seriously ill and elderly. What was the number for Italy? 99% of the population had comorbidities, and the average comorbidities was 2.7, and the average age was 81 with a life expectancy of 82.
So he's just giving you some facts there that are beginning to roll in from Italy and New York City. It says a lot. One final clip from his presentation, clip 9.
I see these as chronic disease deaths. What else would hurt people in this bucket? Let's look at kinetic. What's a fall imply for someone who's obese, diabetic, has had a stroke, is hypertensive? A bathroom fall? Does it portend the same outcome for someone chronically diseased as it does for a healthy 25 years old? Not at all. And that would be true too of a toxin, anything kinetic, any kind of genetic problem, and any microbe is going to create a faster death precipitation within this crowd.
See, we just put ourselves in a much more vulnerable position to any of the risks in the world if we're unhealthy, if we're sick and infirmed. That's what he's pointing out. Now, he goes on to say, in his view, CrossFit fixes the chronic disease problem. And I'm supposing there's quite a few people in the CrossFit community that agree with him. But it's not like CrossFit is the only solution. You can get to the solution in the 7 laws of success, the 7 laws of radiant health. It's right in the Church of God. It's right in our own literature. It's right in the Bible. Jesus said, I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. That's John 10 and verse 10. The Apostle John wrote, "Beloved, I wish above all things that you may prosper and be in health." That's 3 John in verse 2. Prosper and be in health. He stressed above all things. Why? Why does he want us to be in good health? It's not like we're going to live forever in this fleshly frame. Paul said it's appointed unto men once to die. We're all going to die physically. But while we're here, God wants us to be in robust, energetic health so we can serve him, so that we can do the work, so that we can pour our hearts into the work. My son last week told us about this documentary from a couple years ago. It's called Motivation Factor. You have all this sickness going on around the world. And so last Saturday night, we were in our living room watching this documentary at his suggestion. And what I would recommend you see this if you can track it down somewhere. The Motivation Factor. Because what a comparison when you look at the way physical education was taught back in the 1960s compared to today. Listen, this is an excerpt from that documentary, but in it you'll hear President John F. Kennedy challenging the United States, challenging America to become more fit. Clip 10.
I welcome this opportunity to speak to the people of America about a subject which I believe to be most important, and that is the subject of physical fitness. And I speak not only as President of the United States, but also as a parent of 2 children who I hope will grow up with those qualities of vigor and energy which we identify with the best of America. This should be a matter of concern to us all. A country is as strong really as its citizens. And I think that mental and physical health, mental and physical vigor go hand in hand.
And he's right about that. He was wrong about a lot of other things, but he was right about that. The connection between mental and physical vigor. This is something, as he said, that really should concern us all. Husbands, fathers, wives, mothers, children, older, middle-aged, young. Orison Swett Marden, he made that connection between the mental and the physical. He said the character sympathizes with and unconsciously takes on the nature of the body. It says a peevish, snarling, ailing man cannot develop the vigor and strength of character which is possible to a healthy, robust, cheerful man. See, it's easy to just dismiss the physical and think that, well, as long as I get the spiritual right, but they're connected. They are connected. Listen again to the President Kennedy from 1962, clip 11.
And I hope when we have seen the astonishing results which we have seen, where we've been able in the short space of 2 and 3 months to change the physical habits and strength of our children, that this will spread to every school district in the United States. That all of us will participate, and in so doing will be better citizens and happier ones. This is a challenge for us all. Children, boys and girls, college students, mothers and fathers. And all of us, I think, should welcome it. I hope all of you will join in a great national effort to build a strong and better America through physical effort and through the contributions we can make by the drive and force we bring to our daily lives. Thank you.
That's from the documentary, The Motivation Factor. President Kennedy in 1962 issuing a challenge for all of America. If you see some of that video on the YouTube stream, all of these young, fit Americans from the early 1960s, it's quite a bit different today, sadly. And the reality, it's out in front of us every time we step outside of our homes. We're not supposed to now, but you understand the point. When we go outside, when we walk through airports, when we see the young people of today, when we see ourselves in the mirror, It's going in the wrong direction. John F. Kennedy, he wanted it to go in the other direction. He wanted strength and fitness to spread, physical, mental vigor to spread like a disease. Well, there's a lot of school districts today that don't even require it. They don't even require physical education. No PE classes. It's not even important. This is from the documentary itself, or at least from the trailer, clip 12.
If we don't turn this around, this generation will be the first in the history of our country to not live as long as their moms and dads.
If we don't turn this around, I think this documentary is from 3 years ago, 2017. If we don't turn this around, this current generation is not going to live longer than the previous generation. And not because of an infectious disease at a particularly difficult time or season. He's talking about the chronic diseases, the big bucket, the diseases that kill 80% of all the deaths in America each and every year. If we don't turn it around, what's going to happen? Well, and it's not like it's just limited to avoiding chronic disease or getting healthy so that you can be protected from infectious disease. It's just also, it has a profound effect on our overall robust way of living as well. From the National Interest in 2016, it says, if you're an average millennial male, your dad is stronger than you are. In fact, you may not be stronger than the average millennial female. Welcome to the new post-masculine reality. A generation, you see, that's what we're raising. And it goes back to before this year, obviously. Weak individuals, physically, mentally, spiritually. It's such a struggle. Even spiritually. I'm not going to say it's all connected to the physical, but just to get people motivated to do something with God's truth. It's a real challenge. If you're like me, there's areas in our lives that can improve with respect to the physical, the mental, the spiritual, all of it. Here's another clip from that trailer, clip 13.
Point to any part of your body, and we'll start quoting literature, medical studies, into the tens of thousands of articles about the benefits of exercise.
Exercise grows the hippocampal parts of your brain that's important for your memory.
I could see a difference from when I didn't do exercise before teaching reading and when I did do exercise before teaching.
The more fit the kids are, the better they're doing in school.
It's about how do you make the best learner.
Once we see that, you need some forward-thinking schools that are willing to basically restore what we once had, which was mandatory physical fitness.
83% drop in discipline problems from one semester to another, just with that introduction.
That last bit's amazing. That we get this right, then it eliminates other problems. And the same principle applies in the current crisis. If the chronic problem wasn't so bad, then the disease wouldn't be near as bad as what we're seeing. How many other problems are virtually eliminated if we get this right? Where we're faithfully obeying God's physical laws. Now in the church, you automatically have an advantage because you're not eating unclean meats. You're not eating bats and snakes and that sort of thing. But there's more to healthy living. There's more health laws than besides the ones about clean and unclean meats. There's also quarantine. There's also hygiene. There's also the law of moderation. I could point out all the scriptures that talk about what to avoid in excess. And then you look at the modern diet. It does take some study, and sometimes it takes going greater distances to get the right kinds of foods, and maybe even spending a little more money on better quality. But it's worth it, and it's worth it for your family if you can make those extra efforts for the health of your family. What a blessing and benefit it will be. One final clip from this documentary, The Motivation Factor, clip 14.
What we found with our physicians is 80% of them had undiagnosed medical problems. And we've seen almost all of that disappear with this activity.
People don't realize what PE was. They don't understand that physical education could do all those things.
It's got to turn around.
It all comes down to the individual. Can you make an individual love being healthy? That's, I think, the secret to all of it.
Love being healthy. Who wouldn't want that? Well, we all want it, but are we willing to do what it takes to be that way? Cause and effect. Mr. Armstrong wrote, your health, actually I think this is another writer, but it's from Tomorrow's World. Your health is a matter of cause and effect. There are reasons for sickness, and there are laws which will promote better health. The Maker's Instruction Book reveals those laws of good health. It says God gave to the ancient Israelites basic laws of health, which, if obeyed, would quickly prevent or stamp out the terrible incidents of disease afflicting our modern world. Does that sound shocking? It says biblical health laws reveal in plain language the way to avoid much illness and disease. They reveal how to prevent contagious diseases and widespread epidemics. They show how to avoid a host of modern maladies. It's all there. It's all there. It's in the book, the holy book. It's not just strictly about physical health laws, obviously, but there's so much contained in the Holy Bible that's so good for our mental health, our physical health, our spiritual health. This same article says God's laws were designed to prevent illness, to maintain vibrant good health. But the world only gives lip service to them and ignores their source. What a paradox. And so what do we see? What do we see when we look at the world today? We see a lot of sickness, physical, mental, spiritual, sickness through and through, sickness from head to toe, Isaiah 1. It says here, biblical laws are the keys to abundant health. They were devised for your protection and well-being, but if you break them, they will break you. Will you begin to obey those laws? Your future health, physically, mentally, emotionally, will depend in large measure on how you answer that question. We've got to prepare ourselves for what's coming, not just in the weeks ahead with this current pandemic. The worst is yet to come. And God wants his family to be fit, physically, mentally, spiritually, prepared, ready for what's coming. In the last hour, my father wrote, if you want to use your prosperity and health for God's work, you're going to have more prosperity and health. It's like they feed one another. If you're obeying God's laws so that you can serve in the work all the more, then you're going to have a right spiritual mindset. You're going to be more positive. That affects your health. There's a proverb that says that. It's like a merry heart makes like a good medicine. It says that doesn't mean you will always be prosperous and healthy, but you will have more of those blessings. I mean, we are going to get older. The body does slow down. The elderly are vulnerable with this current crisis. But if you're an elderly individual who is healthy, your chances of survival are much, much greater. That has been shown even in the last few days, even in the last week or two. My father writes, if your life is filled with bad health and little or no prosperity, then you should closely examine yourself for sin, because God wishes above all that we prosper and be in health. Like Christ, our first priority must be to invest our health and prosperity in God's work. It's something to think about as we prepare for next week, for Passover and the days of unleavened bread. Take care of yourself, your family. Search and study the laws of radiant health so that you can do your part to protect yourself from disease, so that you can live with a stronger immune system, so that you can have better mental health, so that you can be happier, stronger, more alert, more focused, more successful in your support of God's work. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily Radio Show. Don't forget about the special Saturday edition of this program tomorrow, 3 p.m. in the afternoon here in the UK, 9 a.m. in Oklahoma. We'll look forward to having you join us for another special edition. Email us, td@kpcg.fm. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you again tomorrow.